Well, good morning. Welcome to Integrative Preparedness. I am Steve Smith. I want to talk today a little bit about fighting for your life. Had a guy, one of our patrons over on Patreon, asked a question yesterday. It was after I had talked about the situation of those people being killed, or that one person being killed when they stopped to help a motorist. And the woman pulled a gun on him and walked him into the woods. The young man ended up dead. So I talked about that. And one of our patrons on the Patreon channel, and if you're not over there, I wish you would be. You should be. He says, would you talk more about this? Because a lot of us really don't have the background or an experience to understand the true potential and realities of violence. And so I'm going to, before we get started, remember, regardless of what you saw at the beginning of this, these videos are always brought to you by the Stonemont series, the Reversion, the Revival, the Renewal, An Appeal to Heaven, and the Blessings of Freedom. The book that goes into great detail about how to prepare for, how to survive, and how to rebuild after a total collapse. Could be the collapse of the country through the big one, could be the collapse of the government, could be the collapse of just the world around you and your life. I've never been asked a question that isn't answered in detail in these books. So if you haven't read them, you should. If you have any real interest in preparedness and you haven't read these, this should be your very next step. The links to how to get them are down below in the information box and a pinned comment, and also how to get them from me if you'd like autographed. There's a way to do that, and I'm happy to do that. I like to do that. I love being getting to know my viewers, and I get to do that a lot more over on Patreon, but on YouTube I really enjoy that. And when I have the opportunity, when I get orders in the mail for the books, and I get so many very nice notes and letters and things like that, it really helps me to get to know you all. And I'm happy to autograph those and get those back to you. I won't get them to you as fast as Amazon does. It takes me some time. Amazon, that's what they specialize in, right? They get them to you. But I have to order them from Amazon and then autograph them and send them to you. I have a new shipment coming in, but I'm out right now. And it's just the way that it goes. So that's where you do that. Now back to this. Let me wet my whistle here. So I had one of our patrons asked me to do more like this. For those of you who don't know, I've taught martial arts and combatives and defensive tactics and self-defense and street survival for over 40 years. 40, a lot anyway. 45 more, something like that. Not the kind that you see in the little so-called martial arts school in the strip mall down the block, but the stuff that works when it gets down and dirty in the horribly violent times of life. And so I thought that I'd do this. I just put up kind of a detailed one on the Patreon channel. I'm going to cover some basics here, but I cover a lot more because I get into things over on Patreon, because I get into things there that I just don't want to put here on YouTube. A couple of reasons. They get pretty graphic. They get, I get into more of my personal background. And also because there's a couple of things that when I put them on YouTube, there are far too many people who, not understanding the seriousness of it and not understanding the limitations of their own experience, there's a couple of things that people will get on here and make stupid comments. And then I have to boot them because they'll mislead other people. It's those people who have never really done it who will get on and say, well, I just think this and this and that. Okay, a couple of things that we get into when we get into martial arts, when we get into real violence, and when we get into guns. We just have too many people that have read a couple of magazines, think they know all about it, and then will come on here and then they got to get the boot. So that's why I put so much stuff. If you are not on Patreon, and here it is, so somebody's going to say, you just want people on Patreon. That's right, because that's where you get the real, you get real information here, but you get deeper information. You get a lot more over there. And if you have any interest in this, you ought to be over there. Let me talk about violence. Like I said, I have taught for years and years and years. When you are confronted with a violent situation, and it could be an emergency, any kind of emergency, but in here we're talking about attacks. Most people are confronted with three enemies. You don't have just the attacker, you have three enemies. The first is confusion. The second is fear. And finally, the third is the attacker. And like I say, you can transpose this into emergency situations, and I've seen it time after time after time after time, that people who had a lot of training, all of a sudden when reality is, well, first they're confused because all of a sudden it's not training. They aren't working within the parameters that of their training, which in the back of their mind they know isn't real, and that's a problem. And then when they realize they don't know what they're doing, now they get flustered. And usually, you know, in a training, you're not afraid, but in the real situation, fear can set in. Ask any first responder what happens to what they see in new people, their first real bad situation, and they can get frozen up. And then the attacker or the situation. So we're going to back this up. In an attack situation, you have confusion, fear, and the attacker. Okay. Now it's very difficult to train your way out of those things, and I'm not going to get into the detail. I get into a lot of detail on the Patreon one that I just put up. It is difficult if you don't have the experience. Okay, because you can train all you want. You can train all you want in the dojo. You can train all you want on the gun range. But those just prepare you to learn from experience. I've said this for years. I always tell my new people, you will not meet your real teacher until a real situation happens. Because training prepares you to learn from experience. Okay? And you're going to learn a lot if you survive it. You're going to learn what you know. You're going to learn what you don't know. As I also said over there, there's this old saying of ready, willing, and able. I'm ready, willing, and able. I've got the t-shirt. You know, the old saws, although they don't sound nearly as tactical as the tact-to-talk of today, carry a lot of truth in them. And those three things, you have to be ready, you have to be willing, and you have to be able. Your ability comes from training, okay? The abilities that you should have. Now, those abilities you may or may not be able to use or apply if you're not willing. And that's, a lot of people get slammed up against that wall. They got all the training in the world. You know, they can blow a gnat's ass at 100 yards. But when you're in a real situation, that's different. That's different, and people don't realize how different it is until they've been in it. So the willingness, and that situation to where I talked about yesterday, to where the young man and his girlfriend were walked into the woods. Okay, he had a gun on him, so you might say that he was able, but I'll talk about that in a minute. You might say that he was able. He had the equipment. I don't know what kind of training he had, if any. He might have had some gun training, but he didn't have street survival training, and that is the big difference. Don't confuse that. Don't think that because you can shoot a gun, you are able, you have the ability to defend yourself. It just means you got the tool to do it. Like having a hammer doesn't mean that you can build a house. It just means you have the tool with which those who have the ability can actually build a house. So was he had the gun, but was he willing? The information we have right now makes me doubt that he was. Okay, willingness. He's probably going through a lot of the confusion that I talked about before. And then was he ready? He was not ready. He was not mentally ready because he didn't recognize immediately the potential hazard of the situation. Okay, so people can be able as far as equipment wise and training wise, but he wasn't willing to do what it took. And then a lot of people never get to the willing part because they're not ready. They can be willing and able, but if they're not ready, they're not. Now I will share this part that I put on Patreon, and that is that if you're not ready, you're not ready. It's like carrying. If you carry but you don't carry all the time, you don't carry. You fooled yourself into believing that you're going to somehow know when you need to carry, and you're lying to yourself. You don't know. There's no way to know. There is no, as I said the other day, there's no safe place. I know some people that carry when they go into the city, but they don't carry when they're out here. They don't carry when they're at their daughter's soccer game. They don't carry when they're at their son's hockey game. Well, this is safe. They don't carry to church. They don't carry to the grocery store because for some reason they've made themselves think that nothing in the world could happen there. Go over, I know I keep pumping this because go over to Patreon and look at the links that I've put below. It'll scare the out of you. It'll make you want to puke what happened to people in what they thought were safe situations who weren't ready. You have to always be ready. Always. If you're not always ready, you're not ready. You're living in the fog. I also said over there, this is another thing that I'll say. I've been ready since before I went on the police department. I lived in a violent time. I lived in violent areas. I knew that something could happen at any time for any or no reason because this world is full of predators. The fact that you haven't met any or don't know that you've met any right now doesn't mean that it's not. It means that you're just going through life kind of oblivious to the fact that it is. You need to. Now, the lessons that we found out of that was you have to be ready. You have to be willing. I know these don't sound tactical, right? Tact-to-talk. I need to be wearing a black t-shirt with all sorts of deadly sayings on it, right? I need to go shave my head. And I need to tact-to-talk for people to really believe that I know what I'm talking about. That's silly. Most people who really know what they're talking about, to be honest, don't talk like that. How about that? When these things happen, they happen like that. I also tell people, I've told people for years in my training and my seminars, that an attack may happen suddenly, but it rarely happens without warning. What's the warning? When I walk out of a grocery store and I'm walking to my car, I see everybody. I see everybody. From the big hulking guy that looks like he wants to fight to the little old lady. I see everybody. And I go through the list. And I judge them on, I make a threat assessment. Threat assessment. What kind of threat? You know how many people come up zero? Zero. Nobody comes up zero. That's number one. And I'm always thinking, what happens? And I'm not thinking of this. It's just a pattern of my thought process because I've lived it. I don't think about this consciously. I can still carry on a conversation with whoever I'm walking with. But what if that person all of a sudden comes out with a gun? Okay, do you know how surprised I'm going to be? None. Not at all. Do you know how surprised most people would be? Oh my God! Okay. People will say, well, I don't want to live in fear. I don't live in fear. I live ready. I live mentally tuned in. Most people think that being tuned in to the potential threats in the world around them is being paranoid or scared. It's not. It's being aware. You think the animals in the jungle are live in fear? Well, some do. I mean, the prey lives in fear. And realize what that says, or some of the prey is just oblivious. You don't want that. But like I said in the other, even the leopard in the Amazon, he's careful. He's always aware. Some because he's aware, because he's a predator and he's looking for something to eat. And believe me, predators are always aware. You don't know who's watching you at the soccer game. You don't know who's watching you walking to your car out of the grocery store. You don't know who's watching you and has been watching you when you were at work, and who maybe followed you home. Remember that old, I mentioned this also over there on Patreon, remember that old Charles Bronson movie, Death Wish? What happened to his wife and daughter? Because they're at a grocery store? That happens all the time. Well, all the time. It doesn't happen every day, everywhere, but it happens more often than you can imagine. You have to be, and here's where most people aren't ready. You have to be constantly vigilant. The price, the cost of freedom is constant vigilance, or whatever that is. Okay. The cost of living is constant vigilance. And when something happens, you have to be ready to go. And what I mean is you have to be ready to go 100% from the start line. Another thing that these two kids made a mistake on is that they allowed themselves, through their fear and through their confusion and probably through their hope that everything would turn out all right, they allowed themselves to be taken somewhere else. Never allow yourself to be taken to a second location. That is number one. If they're going to shoot you, make them do it in public. Fight like your life depends on it, because it does. Well, I don't have any training. I don't have any professional training. Well, okay, you can get some, but I tell you, there's a lot of people out there giving training that's bad training. They don't know what they're talking about because they've never been in a life and death situation, and they're just passing on what they've heard from somebody else who's never been in a life and death situation. Let me give you the advice for those who don't have any training. Have you ever tried to control a 4-year-old who is just pitching a fit and kicking and all over? It ain't easy, is it? And you try to carry him someplace, it ain't easy. How easy do you think it would be to carry a 120-pound woman who is doing the same thing, just going nuts? This is for you ladies, okay? How about a man? Men have a tendency not to fight ferociously. Do you realize that? Most men fight with their egos and they're under some kind of control, and most guys don't have any idea how bad things can get so fast. Most guys fight with their fists and maybe a kick or two, but just with their fists and grappling, because that's what they've heard. They don't go after, they do not fight like an animal. Most don't. Now, the ones who do, who know how to do it, oh man, you better hope you never get attacked by one of them. But most people don't. Fight at the moment of your first encounter with your attacker. Fight with everything you've got. Everything. Whether it's your nails, your teeth, your hands, your feet, your elbows, your knees, your head. Whether it's something you've got in your hand, don't fall for that stupid stuff about, I carry car keys in my hand because this guy came and gave us a seminar about the car keys. I'll do something on some weapons that you should probably carry, and it ain't car keys. You're probably not, if you're jumped, you're probably not going to have a chance to get to that gun that makes you feel so safe. Okay? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe, maybe not. I heard somebody. Oh yeah, this got somebody bounced. The guy saying, "Well, but if you're on your back and they're stabbing you, you need to be able to get to your gun." And yeah, are you kidding me? Do you think that if you are on the ground and you're being stabbed, which means you're in the process of being stabbed, you think you're going for your gun? You know how much it hurts being stabbed? You are hardly going to be thinking of anything except getting that thing off, trying to protect yourself and getting them off. And if you don't have the skills or the knowledge or the animalistic fervor to fight back, I'll tell you what, you're not going to get that gun that's back there in that fancy retention holster you got. Violence is animalistic. Violence is horrible. Violence is beyond the ability of the average person to even begin to understand. I mean, true violence. But you have to try. You have to try to think about that. You have to, first is accepting what I've said here. The second thing is to try to understand how it might happen. Visualize it. Excuse me a second, I've got a guy here. Okay, guy showing up to lay Google fiber for my neighbor. Anyway, if you need to fight like your life depends on it, because it does. Fight with everything you've got. Be ready, willing, and able. Okay. Understand that your enemies are not just the attacker. It's confusion, fear, and then the attacker. But it all starts with being ready, which means it all starts with being aware of the world around you and assuming not the best, but prepared for the worst always. That's not living in fear. That's living ready. It's living intelligently. And for those of you who are serious, I put up some some links over on the Patreon in addition to some things that I said in addition to this. You need to know, you need to study what happens to people when they are attacked and taken to a second location. Like I said, it'll make you sick. It'll make you want to puke. But it'll give you that extra impetus to understand the importance of fighting it out with everything you've got at the first moment of contact with someone who wants to hurt or control you. Life ain't a game. Life is life. Life is life and death. And if you're not ready to accept that, all you are is a victim in waiting. Okay? I know this hasn't been a happy one, but it's probably one of the most important ones. So think about that. And again, for those of you who are serious about this stuff, come join us on Patreon. It's only $1 and you get so much more. And for those, I know a lot of people will just want to, for the tourists who just come by and say, well, that was kind of interesting, or, well, I don't know about that. Those are the guys with no experience. Well, I don't want you on Patreon. Okay, so please don't come over there. I would also go ahead and invite anybody here who is law enforcement, former law enforcement, or combat military that wants to come on and add their 2 cents and add their thoughts. That's good. Do not come on here because you've read a magazine, okay, or went to a seminar, or got a black belt when you were 12 years old from one of these pajama dancing academies. Okay, do not. Not interested in hearing that. If you are somebody with no experience and you have questions, love to hear from you. Okay? All right. You all have a good day. Remember that we prepare well today in order to live well tomorrow. If you want preparation, buy and read these books. I don't know if I've said this before. I have never been asked a question that I didn't already answer in detail in one of these books. So get ready. Always be ready, no matter what happens in the world. If you're not ready, you are at the mercy of the next person who comes across your path. Y'all have a good day. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.